It begins with the sound of a bathtub draining. Except this bathtub is 4,000 acres wide, holds 12 billion gallons of water, and sits in the middle of North Florida. The drain is a single 28-foot wide hole in the limestone floor. As of June 2021, Lake Jackson, a massive basin just outside the state capital, effectively vanished. It was not siphoned away by a dam. It was not lost to evaporation. It was swallowed by the earth. The aftermath is a scene from a different planet. A vast, cracked mud plain stretches for miles, littered with exposed tree stumps and stranded boat docks pointing at nothing. The 12 billion gallons of water that once filled this basin have cascaded into the ground through a sinkhole named Porter Hole Sink. And the strangest part of this geological spectacle is not that a lake can disappear. It's that this one has done it before, for centuries. But now the ancient clock that governs its return is broken. The vanishing is accelerating, and where the water goes is a story that connects this dry lake bed to one of the most powerful freshwater springs on the planet, all through a subterranean network of flooded caves. To understand what is happening to Lake Jackson, you have to go back, way back. Before Florida was a state, before the arrival of Europeans, the Muscogee people who lived here for generations had a name for this basin: Okeeheepkee. It means, quite literally, disappearing waters. They knew the cycle. They had watched the lake vanish and return on a timeline so regular you could almost set a calendar by it. The Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto passed through this area in 1539, and his chroniclers describe not a vast lake, but a grassy plain. It was almost certainly in a dry-down phase then. It's an ancient natural process. I'm curious what you think you'd feel seeing a 4,000-acre body of water just gone. For centuries, this cycle was almost predictable. A historian named Jonathan Lammers compiled the chronology of Leon County's disappearing lakes. The records show major drain events for Lake Jackson in 1829, then in 1836, another in 1886. In 1891, a sudden dry down famously stranded 2 passenger steamboats in the mud where they were left to decay. Then the clockwork continued, 1907, 1932, 1982, a rhythm of roughly 20 to 25 years between each vanishing act. For 2 centuries, Okeeheepkee performed its disappearing trick. Then it would rest, the hole would seal itself with sediment, the rains would come, and the lake would be reborn. But that predictability is over. The modern story of Lake Jackson is one of acceleration, of a natural cycle pushed into overdrive. This is the part the headlines do not capture. The mystery was never if the lake disappeared, but where it went. For decades, the assumption was that the water simply seeped into the vast limestone sponge under Florida, the upper Floridan aquifer, and dispersed. But the truth is far more specific, more direct, more like a highway than a sponge. In October of 2017, a team of scientists set out to finally map that highway. The project was led by Dr. Sion E. McGlynn, a principal investigator at McGlynn Laboratories. His team went to Porter Hole Sink, the primary drain hole on the lake bed, which was exposed during another dry period. They carried with them 100 pounds of a very particular tool, a fluorescent tracer dye. The dye, a non-toxic substance called rhodamine, WT, is the same vibrant chemical used to turn the Chicago River green for St. Patrick's Day. Into the swirling vortex of the sinkhole, they poured the entire amount. The goal was to solve a geological mystery. Had the water draining from Lake Jackson ever been scientifically proven to have a specific destination, or did it just vanish into the chaotic plumbing of Florida's karst landscape? The team set up monitoring stations at key locations south of the lake, sensitive instruments capable of detecting the dye at concentrations of just parts per trillion. Then they waited. For 34 days, there was nothing. The water and the dye it carried was moving through total darkness under 19 miles of pine forests, suburbs, and state highways. It was traveling through the Wakulla Sink's cave system, a complex and sprawling network of underground, water-filled conduits. Then, on day 35, an instrument at the region's most famous geological feature lit up. The dye had arrived. It was emerging at Wakulla Spring, one of the largest and deepest freshwater springs on Earth, which pumps out an average of 250 million gallons of water every single day. The experiment was a success. It proved, definitively, that Lake Jackson wasn't just draining into the aquifer. It was being routed, funneling down a 28-foot hole and traveling 19 miles underground to become the source water for Wakulla Spring. In other words, the lake wasn't disappearing, it was relocating. The water from the boat ramps and fishing spots of Tallahassee was being piped by gravity through a massive subterranean river to feed one of Florida's most iconic natural wonders. The average speed of this journey was just under a kilometer per day. Slow, invisible, and utterly relentless. This discovery confirmed a geological theory that was hundreds of years in the making. If you want to see more deep dives into this kind of science, you can subscribe. There is no shortage of mysteries to explore. Anyway, understanding that connection exists is one thing. Understanding the highway itself is another. That required a different kind of expert, a different kind of courage. The Wakulla Sinks cave system isn't just a simple pipe. It is the longest underwater cave in the entire United States. Mapping it was the work of an elite team of volunteer technical divers known as the Woodville Karst Plane Project, or WKPP. These are not recreational scuba divers. They are explorers pushing the absolute limits of human endurance. For years, they have dedicated themselves to charting this unseen world. On December 15, 2007, a team of these divers achieved the impossible. They physically connected the dots, proving a continuous underwater passage from the sinks in Leon County all the way to Wakulla Spring. To do this, they use equipment that looks like it belongs in space. Instead of traditional scuba tanks which release bubbles, they use closed-circuit rebreathers. This technology recycles the diver's exhaled air, scrubbing the carbon dioxide and adding back precise amounts of oxygen. This allows for dives that last not for an hour, but for up to 26 hours straight. They navigate through passages that can be wide as a concert hall or so tight they have to remove their tanks to squeeze through. The water is a constant cool temperature, but the environment is utterly hostile. There is no light, none. The only illumination comes from the powerful beams they carry. If those fail, the darkness is absolute. The pressure at depths of 300 feet is immense, and the risk of decompression sickness, or the bends, is a constant threat that governs every second of their ascent. And there is always the psychological pressure of knowing you are miles from the nearest exit, separated from the surface world by a ceiling of solid rock. Through thousands of hours of this dangerous work, the WKPP divers have mapped 31.9 miles of these flooded subterranean conduits. They are the ones who drew the map that Dr. McGlynn's dye later followed. They revealed a hidden Grand Canyon carved by acidic rainwater over millions of years, right under the feet of the 500,000 people living in the region. They are the cartographers of the void, and their maps tell us that when Lake Jackson's plug is pulled, the water enters a known, albeit terrifying, superhighway. The work they do is a testament to human curiosity, the drive to see what lies in the dark. It's a pretty wild story of dedication. Low-key send this to a friend who likes stories about exploration. It puts a whole new meaning to the phrase, going down the rabbit hole. When the water is gone, the lake bed becomes a different kind of destination. The cracked mud, baked by the Florida sun, turns into a massive open-air museum. For the people who live nearby, a dry down is an opportunity. They walk out onto the plain, not just to see the spectacle, but to go hunting. The same system of sinks and springs that drains the lake also acts as a perfect preservative for things that fall into it. Over millennia, the lake has been a trap for both ancient animals and artifacts of human history. When the water recedes, it gives them all back. Locals have reported finding mastodon teeth, the fossilized remains of giant Ice Age elephants that roamed Florida more than 10,000 years ago. They find ancient pottery shards and stone tool points left behind by the same Native American cultures who named the lake Okeeheepkee. The 2021 dry down was no different. People walked right down into the mouth of Porterhole Sink, scanning the newly exposed rock and mud for treasures from a lost world. It's a surreal sight. A place that is normally a hub for bass fishing and water skiing becomes a paleontological dig site. A temporary Jurassic Park revealed for a few months or years before the waters inevitably return. But the most incredible survivor of the vanishing lake isn't a fossil, it's alive right now. And it shouldn't be. When a 4,000-acre lake drains completely, leaving behind a parched, sun-scorched landscape, you would expect every aquatic creature to perish. The fish, the turtles, the invertebrates, they either get flushed down the sinkhole or die in the rapidly shrinking pools. But in the mud and damp shoreline grasses of Lake Jackson, a tiny creature holds on. In 2022, biologists Dr. Thomas Sawicki and Andrew Cannizzaro, working out of Florida A&M University's Groundwater Biodiversity Lab, formally described a brand new species they had discovered, a tiny shrimp-like crustacean named Cringonix apelachii. This little amphipod is endemic to Lake Jackson. It is found nowhere else on Earth, and its entire existence is an evolutionary masterclass in survival. It has evolved alongside the lake's disappearing act. When the 12 billion gallons of water begin to drain away, this creature doesn't get swept into the aquifer. It doesn't die in the sun. Instead, it burrows into the moist sediment and shelters in the damp, decaying vegetation left along the shoreline. It enters a state of near dormancy, waiting. It can survive for months, even years, in this terrestrial phase until the rains return and the lake refills. Then it emerges, reproduces, and repopulates the entire basin, ready for the next vanishing. It's a life cycle perfectly synchronized with geological chaos. It is a living ghost, haunting a lake that comes and goes, a testament to the sheer tenacity of life in an environment that, by all logic, should be impossible to inhabit. Now, here is the part where the story turns from a natural wonder into an environmental alarm bell. That once predictable 25-year cycle is gone. Something changed around the turn of the millennium. Since 1999, the rhythm has shattered. The lake drained, either partially or fully, in 1999. Then again in 2001, then 2006, 2007, and 2012. The massive viral event in June 2021 was another. And as of today, in spring of 2026, the lake has once again vanished, consumed by an exceptional ongoing drought. The interval has compressed from 2 decades to just a handful of years. Sometimes back-to-back years. The lake's checkbook, as state geologist Guy Harley Means puts it, is perpetually in the red. So why? Why is a cycle that has been stable for centuries suddenly accelerating at such a dangerous rate? The answer lies back underground, in the Floridan aquifer. The aquifer is the massive underground limestone reservoir that supplies virtually all the drinking water for North Florida and parts of adjacent states. Lake Jackson sits on top of it, and the relationship is governed by pressure. When the aquifer is full, the groundwater level is high. This creates hydrostatic pressure pushing up against the sediment plug at the bottom of the lake, helping to keep it sealed. But 2 things are reducing that upward pressure. First, regional droughts. Less rain means the aquifer isn't being replenished as quickly. Second, and more critically, human demand. Tallahassee is a growing metropolitan area. Its population and the surrounding agricultural industry draws heavily on the Floridan aquifer for its water supply. Every day, millions of gallons are pumped out. When a severe drought overlaps with this constant heavy pumping, the water table in the aquifer drops significantly. The upward pressure supporting the lake bed weakens. Suddenly, the immense weight of 12 billion gallons of lake water is pushing down with much more force than the aquifer is pushing up. Gravity takes over. The delicate sediment seal over Porterhole sink, already fragile, can no longer hold. It collapses. The drain is pulled. The acceleration of Lake Jackson's disappearances is a direct indicator of the stress being placed on the underlying aquifer. The lake is the canary in the coal mine, and the canary is collapsing more and more frequently. Guy Harley Means, who serves as director of the Florida Geological Survey, has been on the front lines of this issue for decades. He himself has climbed down into Porter Sink during a dry down to inspect the geology firsthand. In a statement following the dye trace study, he emphasized the importance of this work, saying, "Confirming this connection will help resource managers develop more informed strategies for managing our water resources." This isn't just about one lake. It's about the entire water budget of a region. The increasingly frequent drainages are a physical manifestation of a water system in deficit. The impacts ripple outward. For homeowners around Lake Jackson, their waterfront properties now overlook a field of weeds, boat ramps end abruptly in dry, cracked earth. The ecosystem is in a constant state of disruption and recovery. While some biologists, like Chris Paxton of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, note that a periodic dry down can actually be healthy for a lake's long-term ecology, clearing out muck and allowing for new vegetation growth. That benefit depends on the periodic part. When the cycle becomes this frequent, the system doesn't have time to recover. The fish populations of largemouth bass and bluegill are repeatedly compressed into a few deep pools, stressed to their limits. And the story is not unique to Lake Jackson. 19 miles south of the lake, near the Tallahassee airport, is another karst basin called Cascade Lake. There, the same phenomenon is visible. Ancient cypress trees that have spent decades with their bases submerged now stand fully exposed, their trunks marked with a stark, pale band of bark 10 feet high, a watermark showing where the water is supposed to be. And the destination isn't immune from problems either. Wakulla Spring, the end of the line for Lake Jackson's water, is already listed as an impaired water body by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. It faces its own challenges from nutrient pollution. Now, it's receiving these massive, sudden injections of an entire lake's volume, water that is full of tannins and organic material from the lake floor. The full effects of these massive pulses on the spring's delicate chemistry are still being studied. And then there is the existential question buried in the data. The Floridan aquifer doesn't just support lakes. It provides the drinking water for well over 500,000 people in the immediate area and millions more across the state. If Lake Jackson, a huge visible feature on the landscape, is this vulnerable to the aquifer's fluctuations, what does that say about the stability of the water supply that everyone relies on but nobody can see? What does it mean when a geological process that took place every quarter century is now happening on the timescale of a presidential election cycle? The collapsing rhythm of Okeeheepkee is a warning. It's a signal that the invisible resource propping up the entire region is under an unprecedented level of strain. As of spring 2026, the situation remains critical. Lake Jackson is, for the most part, a grassy, muddy plain. Leon County is under an exceptional drought designation, the most severe category. Porter Hole Sink remains open, a gaping maw in the earth, ready to swallow any rain that might fall before it has a chance to accumulate. Meteorologists watch for stalled cold fronts, or the promise of the Atlantic hurricane season, which begins on June 1st. A single, slow-moving tropical system could dump enough rain to refill the entire 4,000-acre basin in a matter of days. But without that kind of deluge, the short, scattered showers of a typical Florida summer often evaporate before they can make a difference. The plug in the bathtub does not stay out forever. The same geological forces that pull it will eventually allow sediment and debris to clog it once again. Porter Hole Sink will seal itself, as it has done for millennia. But no one can say when. It could be months. It could be years. The lake will return, but the questions left behind by its latest vanishing act are more urgent than ever. Some people forget to subscribe after they finish a video, so here is a gentle nudge if you want to see the next investigation. 3 questions hang over the cracked mud of the basin tonight. How long will the aquifer remain this low, leaving the lake vulnerable to instant drainage? Why is the ancient natural cycle of this lake fundamentally broken? And what happens to a society built on top of a vast, invisible reservoir when the signs on the surface show that it is being depleted faster than it can be refilled? The water that covered the boat